All right, so let's talk about, no doubt the sort of leading candidates in this race. We have Janeese Lewis George, who's been sort of really the candidate to beat at this point. I thought a lot of the candidates have really focused on her. She has been able to draw support from really a large swath of the Democratic Party, but she's also faced opponents and also President Trump himself.
Yeah, that's right. Tonight her campaign is gathering in Shaw as the results are coming in. I know, of course, they are hoping for a win, that
yes.
A lot of voters ranked her first. Our Rafael Sanchez-Cruz is live at the historic Howard Theater with what she is telling voters just, I guess, hours before the polls closed. You spent the day with her, Rafa.
Yeah, that's right, Lorenzo, Larry. We're at the historic Howard Theater, and as you can see right behind me, preparations are still underway to get the stage ready. So here's how the program will run today. We are told that speakers will start taking the stage at around 9:30. We're going to hear from a series of supporters of Janeese Lewis George. That includes union leaders, her former boss, Carl Racine, who is the former Attorney General of D.C., who actually just walked in the door a couple minutes ago. And then we will hear from Janeese Lewis George at some point. And I'm saying at some point because, as you mentioned, there are still people in line. And I'm being told by her campaign that they're actually transporting some people to different voting centers where the lines are actually shorter to make sure that people can cast their votes and make it to the party here at Howard Theater. And look, let's be honest, it's been a contentious election cycle here in the district. There's been a lot of mudslinging, and it's been a difficult 5 days for the campaign of Janeese Lewis George. We heard just 5 days ago President Donald Trump threatening to take over the district if Janeese Lewis George were elected to be D.C.'s next mayor. This, of course, because she's a Democratic socialist. And last Friday, D.C.'s Office of Campaign Finance accused Lewis George and her campaign of improperly coordinating with labor unions and a super PAC who contributed more than $1 million to her candidacy. Now, this investigation resulted in a $16,000 fine, which her team is appealing. We caught up with Lewis George today, who says DC voters see right through this investigation, that she's calling politically motivated. I asked her if she thinks being a Democratic socialist helped or hindered her campaign. This is what she had to say.
To me, it is not controversial, nor is it radical to believe that we can have affordable childcare and utilities and housing in this city. And it's not radical to believe that basic government services should work for anyone, no matter what ward they live here in this city. And I think that's been clear, and that's resonated with so many voters in this city. They don't care about labels. They care about, do you care about me, and does your politics include me? And it's been abundantly clear that people feel included within my campaign.
Now, let's talk about what's happening at these voting centers. There is a concern that there is a low voter turnout. Multiple people reaching out and kind of saying that they're monitoring the situation. I can tell you that it's been very contentious even among the polling centers. People being really divided. There's been a little bit of digs being thrown out as voters are heading in to cast their votes. And I asked Lewis George about this. What are you going to do if elected the next mayor of D.C. to really feel the embrace and welcome of those voters who did not support you? Perhaps it was Kenyon McDuffie or any of the other candidates on the ballot. And she was telling me, look, I am going to be a mayor for all D.C. residents. She also says there's some things that are just common sense that everyone can agree on, like restoring and making sure, restoring the services that are offered here in the district, but also just making sure that the local D.C. government works. She says this is not controversial. This is something that everyone can agree on. So that is her message tonight. Again, we had a long and extensive conversation. At some point, it also turned personal, where she's sharing how she feels. She told me that she feels she's DC's dream. We'll hear more about that coming up and hear from some of her supporters who are joining here tonight at Howard Theater, which will be a long night, as we've mentioned time and time again. Likely we won't have final results, but regardless, people here are going to celebrate her campaign, and she herself says that she's looking forward for some time to relax, but also get back to her job as Ward 4 council member, which she's continued throughout this entire campaign. Larry, Lorenzo?
Yeah, Rafa, before we talk about some of the issues here, can you give us some idea of what we're expecting to happen where you are tonight? Because this looks like a typical election night. You know, a winner is declared later on. But again, we're using ranked choice voting here. So more than likely, consider looking at the polling and whatnot, who knows if she'll reach that 50-point threshold, 50.1, to get her over that 50% line to be declared the winner here. So what are we expecting to hear?
Look, they've been calling it a party, but they haven't said a victory party or a watch party. I did ask Janeese Lewis George how she felt that she would pass that 50% threshold now that we have ranked choice voting here in the district. And she tells me she's hopeful, she's motivated, she thinks she's really going to pass that threshold. But the reality is that they know that this is simply just going to be an acknowledgement of the campaign. That's why we don't have a real sense of time of when she will take the stage. Her campaign is telling me that they're waiting to see how the polls turn out, making sure that everyone has cast their vote and that all voting centers don't have any lines before she comes out. That's why we're expecting around 9:30 to hear from her supporters. Again, some of the labor unions who have now are now part of that investigation by the DC's Office of Campaigning and Campaign Finance, excuse me. But they're going to take the stage. They've been staunch supporters since the beginning, and that's something that she's definitely touting. But it's a very fluid night so far. So that's why, we were expecting things to kick off immediately at 8 p.m. But again, things are getting pushed back, especially after we saw that after dinner rush to voting centers. I can tell you, look, we've been out here since around 4 o'clock in Shaw, and we were seeing lines. We didn't see any lines really, but then really when work started getting out, we saw people rushing in, some people having their mail-in ballots, and they were just dropping them off. So that's why we're seeing kind of a different situation, and people are saying, look, this is a new reality of DC elections. So tonight will really play out how November will turn out and how future elections will play out, and perhaps we'll see these types of events later on when they think that they're getting closer to having those final results. So that's kind of what we're looking at. 9:30 for speakers, 10:30 potentially, and again, that's only if they feel confident with the polling, and they're really trying to drill down what messaging Janeese Lewis George is going to deliver tonight. Maybe it's waiting. She did say, I did ask her, what do you tell your voters and supporters if this turns out to be several days of not having any final results? And she said, look, patience and just focus on our mission. And also, she's saying she's going to take the time to really build out an entire team in the next 6 months if she is victorious and becomes a Democratic nominee as mayor here in DC.
Rafael, before we let you go, a couple of things that you mentioned that I think it warrants us to sort of dissect a little bit. Low voter turnout, that campaign finance violation, and the threat from President Trump. All of these variables together could signal to the campaign, at least from us watching here back at the studio, that potentially they're nervous about what the results will be. Have you gotten any sort of sense, based on your conversations with the campaign, even voters that are there with you, that they are nervous about what the outcome will be tonight?
Yeah, look, I've been speaking to people at the Wilson building who are closely monitoring the situation. And look, ranked choice voting, again, was something that DC voters approved twice. And the real appeal to it was actually making sure that everyone was being reached out, right? That these candidates weren't just winning with a small majority, but the concern now is that perhaps these issues, as you just mentioned, have turned off some voters, right? I can tell you, when you're talking about that, the campaign violations that were ruled last week, a lot of people say that's not on their mind. Even McDuffie supporters are like, no. I think that most people are making a decision today, having a very clear difference between the two leading candidates, Kenyon McDuffie and Janeese Lewis George. But there is that concern that, again, we're going to see a small margin potentially defining who the winner is for not only the mayoral race, but all the races altogether. Teams of some of the staffers for the council members who work at the Wilson building have been reaching out. They don't have any candidates in these races, but they're saying, I am saddened to see this low turnout. We're just kind of observing how things are. And they're definitely concerned that, again, we're going to see a very low participation. Those people that are showing up, look, sometimes it's really hard to get people's opinions about how they feel about a topic like politics, but not this time around. People feel really passionate about their candidate. They feel really passionate about what direction they want the district to go. And I think the messaging of who each candidate is has been very clear. Despite us hearing very similar messaging today from both Janeese Lewis George and Kenya McDuffie saying that they're fighting for an inclusive DC, an affordable DC, for a mayor that really stands up to President Donald Trump. These are messages that both delivered, but the candidate messaging is really resonating, right? I've even heard from those people that are supporting Rini and are saying, look, she's the person that's really going to streamline services here in the district. So I don't think there's any doubt that people really got a clear idea of who their candidates are. But unfortunately, I am wondering if there will be some kind of polling afterwards, whether this was actually, whether these topics that we mentioned have actually turned off some voters.
Yeah, and we look at that number of people from the Washington Post poll and CityCast. We talk about roughly a quarter of people who are undecided. I imagine if you are in that camp, you aren't really that enthused to be heading out to vote for a particular candidate, considering how close those polls were to Election Day. And you know, Rafa, you mentioned a moment ago, talking about Janeese Lewis George and the message that she will try to drive home tonight. Hopefully she will emphasize this ranked choice voting, not only the process that people had to utilize to vote, but also how these votes are going to be counted. Because again, people expect to know, you know, who will lead their city, either tonight or at the very latest tomorrow. But because of this process we were mentioning, we could find out next week. And we know as this goes on and on that there is a bit of skepticism. What are we going to say, Rafa?
Definitely, that's exactly what I was going to say. There's definite skepticism, and there are those, as we heard from when early voting started, that said, look, I only voted for one person because that's how I'm used to voting. I have heard from people from all ages. At first it was, perhaps people that are just used to traditional voting saying, look, I don't like ranked choice voting. But now I heard people from all ages saying it was confusing despite the help that we were getting from some of the people working for the Board of Elections who were kind of walking people through the process to make sure that they didn't skip one of the ranked choice options and that their ballot was actually able to be tabulated. So there's definite some skepticism, and waiting this long and dragging out this process with an already long election season is definitely going to be something that we need to keep an eye on. I will say that most people, when I was saying, are you participating in any kind of celebration, any event? And they're like, why? Why if we're not going to have any results? So that's definitely, I think, the pending question here. That skepticism, despite supporting some of these candidates and supporting ranked choice voting, I think people are still kind of trying to process how this will all play out. And again, I can't say it enough. This is essentially going to be the trial run to see how the Board of Elections has to kind of manage this situation, this new reality, and also voters, how they manage their expectations, and candidates as well. We'll see, who really will get the benefit of ranked choice voting when we see those results play out, and how long it will really take until we know who the Democratic nominees are.
That's what I was trying to figure out. Like, how do you have a big party when you're probably not going to
We're likely not going to party tonight. But you can always count on a DC voter for a good zinger,
To party.
Yeah, seriously. All right, Rafa, we'll be checking back in with you a little later. It is still early. Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right.